Thanks for tuning in to Vows Shattered. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. John Davis adjusted the worn strap of his tool bag as he entered the modest two-story home he had built with his wife, Elena. At 38, John had come to treasure the simplicity of their life, the warmth of their small home, the laughter of their 6-year-old daughter in the evenings, and the sense of purpose he felt in providing for his family were more than enough for him. But lately a chill had settled in his marriage, an unspoken tension that neither of them dared address. Elena's demeanor had shifted over the past year. She seemed restless, her once vibrant smile often replaced by a distant gaze. John first noticed it in small things, her increasingly frequent late nights, catching up with friends, the sudden fitness regimen, the unreadable expression when he spoke about his long work days. Yet he brushed these signs aside, trusting that they were merely life adjustments. One autumn evening, John came home early. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the living room, illuminating a photo on the mantel, an image of their wedding day. Elena's beaming face stared back at him, a stark contrast to her recent coolness. From the kitchen, he heard her voice, low and conspiratorial. "I just need more than this, Mark," Elena said, her words carrying the sharpness of discontent. "John's a good man, but he doesn't get me." John froze. He had no intention of eavesdropping, but the name Mark stung like a slap. Mark, the young man from Elena's gym, with his easy charm and confident demeanor. His name had surfaced in casual conversations before, but always in harmless tones, or so John had convinced himself as he went about his life, not only as a professional, but also as a profession that he believed in. The conversation ended abruptly when Elena hung up the phone. She turned and saw John standing there, his face a mask of composure. "You're home early," she said, her tone tinged with surprise and unease. John forced a smile, nodding as he set his bag down. "Thought I'd catch up on some rest," he said evenly, though his mind churned with questions and doubts. Who was Elena now? Was she truly the same woman he had fallen in love with a decade ago? That night, John lay awake, staring at the ceiling as Elena slept beside him. Her words echoed in his mind, the implications gnawing at his sense of security. He realized he had been walking through their marriage with blinders on, content to assume that their quiet life was enough for both of them. But now his instincts told him to prepare, not for a fight, but for clarity, for truth, and for whatever came next, and engender Karar. The days following John's discovery felt surreal, as if the walls of his world were slowly caving in. He moved through his routines with quiet deliberation, each action masking the turmoil inside. Elena remained oblivious to his suspicions, her behavior oscillating between guilt-ridden kindness and a detached disinterest that only deepened his sense of unease. In his heart, John clung to a fragile hope that perhaps he had misunderstood. Maybe Alina's words were innocent, her dissatisfaction temporary, yet the seed of doubt had taken root, growing with each passing day. He began to notice every inconsistency, every late-night text she dismissed with a vague excuse. The cracks in their marriage, once invisible, now seemed impossible to ignore. One evening, as Elena prepared to head out for yet another yoga class, John found himself unable to stay silent. Standing in the doorway of their bedroom, he watched her tie her sneakers with a meticulousness that felt almost performative. "Busy night ahead?" he asked, his tone casual but edged with an undercurrent of curiosity. Elena glanced up, her eyes flickering with a momentary hesitation. "Just the usual," she replied, smoothing her workout clothes. "I might grab coffee with some of the girls afterward." John nodded, suppressing the urge to confront her outright. Instead, he made a decision that went against every instinct of trust he had once placed in her. As soon as she left, he picked up her tablet from the living room table and unlocked it. It wasn't a proud moment, but it felt necessary. A desperate attempt to make sense of the storm brewing in his life. What he found wasn't the damning evidence he feared, but it was enough to confirm his suspicions. A string of messages to someone saved under the innocuous name MM hinted at a closeness that went far beyond casual friendship. The messages were playful and placed with descriptions about plans that John was clearly not a part of, and the name Mark jumped out at him, accompanied by photos of places Elena had claimed to be solo, restaurants, scenic jogging paths, even a bar downtown where she had once insisted she was meeting co-workers. John stared at the screen, his hands trembling. It wasn't just the betrayal that gutted him, it was the realization that she had woven an entire separate world, one that excluded him entirely. For a moment he considered calling her, demanding answers, but a voice inside him whispered to wait. Reacting impulsively wouldn't solve anything. If he wanted to salvage their marriage, or at least find closure, he needed to approach this carefully. Shaking, he set the tablet down and sat in the quiet of their home, his mind racing. The next few days passed in a blur of tense silences and forced smiles. Alina continued her routines as if nothing had changed, but John began to see her actions through a different lens. The moments when she lingered in the bathroom, the hushed phone calls she took outside, even the way she avoided his eyes at dinner. It all painted a picture he couldn't ignore. Seeking support, John turned to the one person he knew he could trust completely, his sister, Sophia. She had always been his sounding board, her no-nonsense approach to life often cutting through the noise of his doubts. Over coffee in her small kitchen, he told her everything, from the overheard conversation to the messages he had found. Sophia listened without interrupting, her brow furrowing with concern. When he finished, she reached across the table and placed a comforting hand on his. "John, you don't deserve this," she said firmly. "But before you make any big decisions, you need to be sure. Talk to her. If she's made up her mind, you'll know." Her words stayed with him as he drove home, the sun setting in hues of orange and red that mirrored the turmoil in his chest. That night, as he lay in bed beside Elena, the distance between them felt insurmountable. He knew a confrontation was inevitable, but the timing had to be right. For now, he resolved to observe, to gather his thoughts and strength. Elena's betrayal had shaken him to his core, but it hadn't broken him. Beneath the pain was a simmering determination, a resolve to take control of his life and future, no matter where it led. The night of the confrontation, the atmosphere in the Davis household was fraught with unspoken tension. John had planned the evening meticulously, waiting until their daughter was asleep and the house was quiet. He sat at the edge of the couch, fingers interlocked, replaying his approach in his mind. Confronting Elena wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about truth. He needed to hear her say it, to confirm what his heart already knew, that his friend was there, to confirm what his heart already knew, but was not meant to be. Elena entered the living room wearing her usual air of calm detachment. She glanced at him briefly, as if sensing that something was amiss, but made no comment. Instead, she sat on the far end of the couch, scrolling through her phone. Her nonchalance added fuel to the fire in John's chest, but he forced himself to remain composed. "Elena," he began, his voice steady despite the tension. "We need to talk." She looked up, her expression guarded. "About what?" John took a deep breath, preparing to rip the Band-Aid off. "About us. About where we are. About Mark." The mention of the name hit like a thunderclap. Elena froze, her grip on the phone tightening imperceptibly before she placed it face down on the coffee table. "What are you talking about?" she asked, though her tone betrayed the confidence she was trying to project. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about," John replied, leaning forward. "I've been noticing things, changes in you. The late nights, the way you've been distant. I've seen the messages, Elena. I know about Mark." For a moment, the room was so silent that John could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Elena's face shifted from shock to indignation. "You went through my things?" she accused, her voice rising. "That's a complete violation of my privacy." "Privacy?" John snapped, his voice sharp but controlled. "We're married, Elena. We're supposed to share our lives, not keep secrets. What about my trust? What about the life we've built together? Does that mean nothing to you?" Elena crossed her arms defensively, her eyes narrowing. "You don't understand. It's not as simple as you think." and make me understand, John countered. Because right now, all I see is my wife throwing away our marriage for what? Some fleeting thrill? Tell me, Alina, why him? Why now? Her defenses crumbled slightly, and, for the first time, John saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. She looked away, her voice softening. "It's not about him," she murmured. "It's about me. I feel trapped. Our life, it's so predictable, so routine. I just wanted something more." John's heart clenched at her words, the pain of betrayal cutting deeper than he thought possible. "More," he repeated bitterly. "More than the man who's worked every day to provide for you and our daughter? More than the family we've built together? What else could you possibly need?" Elena's gaze hardened again, her guilt giving way to defiance. "I need to feel alive, John. I need excitement, passion, things we haven't had in years. You're so wrapped up in being the perfect provider that you've forgotten how to be my partner." The words stung, but John refused to let her shift the blame entirely onto him. "So your solution is to run to another man? To throw away everything we've built because you're bored? You could have talked to me, Elena. We could have worked on this together. Instead, you chose to betray me." Elena stood, pacing the room as if trying to escape the weight of the conversation. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "It just did, and I don't know how to fix it." John rose to his feet, his posture firm, but not aggressive. "You're right about one thing," he said quietly. "You don't know how to fix this. But I do." Her head snapped toward him, her expression a mix of fear and confusion. "What do you mean? I'm done fighting for someone who doesn't respect me," John said, his voice steady and resolute. "You've made your choice, Elena, and now I'm making mine. I won't beg you to stay, and I won't cling to a marriage that's already broken." The finality of his words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to respond, but found no words. Instead, she sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. John didn't look back as he walked toward the bedroom. He began packing her belongings into a suitcase, methodically folding each item as if it were part of some healing ritual. By the time Elena joined him, her eyes red from unshed tears, he had already zipped the suitcase shut. "John, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll end things with Mark. I'll do whatever it takes." He turned to her, his expression one of quiet determination. "I wanted to believe that once," he said. "But trust isn't something you can patch up overnight. It takes years to build and seconds to destroy. Right now, I need time. I need space." As he carried her suitcase to the door, Elena followed, pleading with him to reconsider. But John had made up his mind. He set the suitcase down and opened the door, the cool night air rushing in. "Elena," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "You wanted more from life. Now you're free to find it. I hope it brings you the happiness you're looking for." With that, he closed the door, leaving Elena standing on the porch. Inside, the weight in John's chest began to lift. It wasn't the resolution he had hoped for, but it was the start of something new, a chance to reclaim his life on his terms. When the door shut behind Elena, the sound reverberated through the house like a closing chapter of a book John never thought he'd have to write. He stood there for a moment, his hand resting on the doorknob, as if expecting it to open again. But the quiet of the house, save for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, made it clear she was gone, and this was his new reality. When the door snapped open and open for me, the room filled with darkness, strange as ancient, ill-governed city. John walked back into the living room and sank onto the couch, the weight of the confrontation finally settling on his shoulders. The room felt cavernous, the absence of Elena's presence amplifying its stillness. Her perfume lingered faintly in the air, a bittersweet reminder of the life they once shared. He looked at the family photo that still sat on the mantelpiece. Him, Elena, and their daughter, all smiles at a picnic last summer. It felt like a lifetime ago. How could a woman who once seemed so committed to their family drift so far away? John's thoughts were a swirl of grief, anger, and disbelief, but somewhere deep inside, he felt a flicker of relief. The uncertainty was over. Now came the hard part, moving forward. The next morning, John woke to the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing from the backyard. Despite the heaviness in his chest, the sound brought a small smile to his lips. It reminded him of his reason for pressing forward, no matter how painful this chapter of his life might be. He stepped onto the back porch and watched as his daughter chased Bubbles, her carefree joy untouched by the events of the night before. John knew he couldn't let his pain overshadow her childhood. She deserved stability and love, even if her parents' marriage had fallen apart. "Daddy, look!" she squealed, holding up a bubble wand triumphantly, her fingers stretched out, her arms clasped as if in welcoming as she waited, hesitating for more. John walked over and knelt beside her. "That's a mighty fine bubble wand you've got there," he said with a smile ruffling her hair. "But do you think it can make bigger bubbles than mine?" He picked up another wand and started blowing, earning a delighted giggle as she joined in. For a moment, everything felt normal, as if the storm of the previous night hadn't happened. But as the morning passed and they sat down for breakfast, his daughter looked at him with the question in her wide, innocent eyes. "Where's Mommy?" she asked, her fork hovering over her plate of pancakes. John paused, his heart clenching. He had rehearsed this moment in his head all night, knowing the truth would have to be told carefully. Um, Mommy needed to take some time away, he said gently, meeting her gaze. But no matter what, you and I will always be here for each other, okay? She nodded slowly, sensing the seriousness of his tone. Then, as children often do, she turned her focus back to her pancakes, accepting the explanation for now. John was grateful for her resilience, but knew more questions would come in time. Over the next few weeks, John poured his energy into creating a new routine. He kept his daughter's days filled with school, play dates, and weekend trips to the park. Each evening they worked on puzzles or read stories before bedtime, their bond growing stronger as they navigated this new chapter together. But the nights were harder. When the house grew quiet and his daughter was asleep, John found himself grappling with the emptiness left in Eleanor's wake. Memories of their life together haunted him, her laughter during lazy Sunday mornings, the way she'd light up while decorating for the holidays. Those moments felt like artifacts from another life, bittersweet and unreachable. John reached out to Sophia, his sister, more frequently during these lonely evenings. Over cups of coffee at her kitchen table, she listened as he unloaded his thoughts and frustrations. She was everything to me, John admitted one night, his voice raw, and I thought I was everything to her. Sophia placed a comforting hand on his arm. People change, John, sometimes in ways we can't predict. That doesn't mean you failed. It just means it's time to figure out what you want from here on out. Her words stuck with him. What did he want? The realization came slowly, but surely. He wanted peace, clarity, and a future where he could rebuild, whether that meant on his own or with someone new. He wanted to be the kind of father his daughter could look up to, someone who met life's challenges with strength and grace. One rainy afternoon, weeks after Elena's departure, John sat at his desk, going through paperwork for the house. It was a quiet moment of reflection when his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his chest tighten. Elena. Her message was short. "Can we talk?" John stared at the screen, the weight of her words pressing down on him. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to shield himself from whatever she might say. But another part, a stronger, calmer part, knew he had to face her again, not for closure, but for his own growth. He replied simply, "We can meet tomorrow." When the day arrived, John found himself sitting across from Eleanor at a small cafe. She looked different, worn as if the weeks apart had taken a toll on her, but her gaze was steady, her tone softer than it had been in months. "John," she began, her voice tinged with regret, "I don't know how to say this, but I'm sorry for everything, for hurting you, for losing sight of what we had." John listened, his expression calm but unreadable. Her apology felt genuine, but it didn't change the scars left behind. "Elena, he said, his voice steady. "I appreciate that, but I've learned a lot about myself since you left, and I think we both need time to figure out who we are and what we want." Her eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded. They talked for a while longer, not about reconciliation, but about their daughter, their future as co-parents, and the lessons learned from their shared pain. As John walked out of the cafe, the rain lightly drizzling, he felt lighter. For the first time in weeks, the road ahead seemed clearer. It wasn't the ending he had hoped for, but it was a beginning, a chance to reclaim his life and build something new. As the months passed, the initial storm of pain and confusion in John's life began to settle. His house, once filled with the weight of Elena's betrayal, now brimmed with the sound of laughter, the aroma of his daughter's favorite meals, and the quiet satisfaction of a life being rebuilt. Though the ache of loss still lingered, John still lingered. One small step at a time, he made a conscious decision to embrace the things he had set aside during his marriage. Hobbies he had neglected, like woodworking and photography, became outlets for his emotions and avenues for rediscovering himself. The garage, once a neglected story space, transformed into his slow but steady healing. One afternoon, as he sanded a piece of cedar for a bookshelf, his daughter bounded into the garage, holding a drawing in her small hands. "Daddy, look!" she exclaimed, handing him the paper. It was a crude but charming depiction of the two of them at the park, complete with stick figure smiles and a big yellow sun. John smiled as he admired her work. "This is amazing, sweetheart," he said, lifting her into his arms. "We need to frame this and hang it in the living room." Her giggle was infectious, and for a moment John realized how much joy she had brought into his life. Even in the face of heartbreak, his bond with his daughter had deepened, becoming the anchor that kept him grounded. John also made efforts to reconnect with old friends, some of whom he hadn't seen in years. Over the course of his marriage, he had allowed many relationships to fade, focusing solely on family life. Now, Friday evenings occasionally saw him sharing beers with his childhood best friend, Greg, or joining a local hiking group that explored nearby trails. It was during one of these hikes that he met a woman named Rachel. She was part of the group, a kind and spirited single mother with an easy laugh and a love for the outdoors. Their conversations started casually, about the best hiking boots and favorite trails. But over time, they deepened. They shared stories of loss and resilience, finding comfort in the parallels of their experiences. Rachel's warmth and understanding reminded John of what it felt like to connect with someone on a meaningful level. But this time, he approached the possibility of a new relationship with caution. He wasn't looking to rush into anything. His priority remained his daughter and his own healing. Still, the idea of opening his heart again didn't feel as impossible as it once had. Meanwhile, co-parenting with Elena became an exercise in patience and communication. Their interactions were civil, if not warm, and focused solely on their daughter's well-being. They coordinated school pickups, playdates, and holidays with the careful precision of two people determined to minimize conflict. Though the emotional scars of their separation remained, John found solace in the fact that their daughter was adjusting well. One evening, as John tucked her into bed, she looked up at him with a thoughtful expression. "Daddy, are you happy?" she asked, her voice quiet but insistent. The question caught him off guard. He paused, considering his answer carefully. "I'm getting there," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Every day I feel a little happier, and having you by my side helps a lot." She smiled, her eyes bright. "I'm happy too. I like it when it's just us sometimes." Her words stayed with him long after she had fallen asleep. They reminded him that happiness wasn't a destination, but a journey, one he was willing to take, no matter how long it took. As seasons changed, so did John. He began to see his life not as something shattered, but as something evolving. The pain of the past hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had become a part of his story, a chapter that led to growth and renewal. One day, while cleaning out the attic, John came across an old box of photos. Among them was a picture of him and Elena on their wedding day. He stared at it for a long moment, feeling a mix of sadness and gratitude. That chapter of his life had given him his daughter and countless lessons about love, trust, and resilience. Carefully, he placed the photo back in the box and returned it to its corner. He wasn't erasing his past, but he wasn't living in it anymore either. On a crisp autumn morning, John stood in the backyard, watching his daughter climb the branches of their sturdy oak tree. Her laughter echoed through the cool air, and he found himself smiling without effort, unpredictable but full of possibility. John didn't know what lay ahead, but he was certain of one thing: he had survived, and he had grown. The man who once felt lost in the wake of betrayal now stood tall, ready to embrace the next chapter of his life with courage and hope.